Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so I just kind of picked a silly title for this video, although it does kind of have a lot of meaning. So it's called When You Want to Break the Clock, like Phil Connors in Groundhog Day. Okay, so the reason why I called it that is so in the movie Groundhog Day, he keeps living Groundhog's Day over and over and over again. Okay. And so there's a lot of significance to the clock in that movie. And we see it constantly changing time from 5:59 to 6 o'clock in the morning, which is interesting. And then there's this whole scene where he just keeps breaking the clock every morning. Okay, because he's tired of it being the same day all the time. And so I was really thinking about this. Like during Sukkot, when Jesus didn't come back during Sukkot, I really wanted to break the clock because, in a way, because we've been waiting such a long time for Jesus to return. And Sukkot, especially this year, which was October of 2024, just had a lot of signs that seemed to point to the Messiah. So I definitely had my hopes up. So a lot of the prophets on YouTube, we were definitely, Rosh Hashanah was a big day that we were looking for. Well, I'm looking for Jesus's return. A lot of people are looking for the rapture. And so Rosh Hashanah was a big day that they were looking for the rapture, and then of course that didn't happen. And then Yom Kippur was another big day, which was October 12th. And then Sukkot. And Sukkot has 7 days, and then there's an 8th day, and then there's a 9th day in the diaspora. So everybody was looking at those dates. But nothing, well, I shouldn't say nothing happened, because a lot happened in the world, but we didn't see Jesus return. We didn't see the rapture happen. And so I was watching Groundhog Day, and there's the scene in there where he wakes up and it's the same day, it's Groundhog Day, and he goes, "Oh no." And I could so relate to him, because I am like that every time I predict a date, and and then the day comes and it's like, "Oh no, Jesus didn't come back." So we're still in the tribulation. And so that's just a great scene, and then obviously the scenes where the repetitive scenes where he's breaking the clock. And then I also like when he says, "I'll give you a winter prediction. It's going to be cold, it's going to be gray, and it's gonna last you for the rest of your life." So just really kind of that pessimism about, is it ever gonna warm up and be summer and not be gray anymore? Is it ever gonna end? And that movie was kind of interesting because it wasn't clear in the movie, like, how would you end? Like, he never knew why he got in this nonstop Groundhog Day, and he never knew what would get him out of it, but he used the time to just make himself a better person, which was good. And so there might have been an implication that he improved himself enough that the gods that be, or whatever the thinking was in that movie, finally let him out of the repetitive Groundhog Day. But that movie is kind of a good metaphor for, one, the tribulation period. So I believe we've been in a 14-year tribulation period, that I think we had. I was thinking the tribulation started October 25th, 2010, and so we hit the 14-year mark on October, can't find it in my calendar, but October 25th, um 2024. So we've hit the 14 mark, and then I was definitely thinking that the tribulation period would be 14 years, because we read about how Jacob works for a wife, and he, first he works for um well, I mean, he thought he was working for Rebecca or Rachel, and he got Leah instead, and then he had to work another 7 years. So he really ended up working 14 years, to get the wife that he wanted. Um, so, you know, and so, that's why like Simchat Torah, October 25th was kind of standing out in my mind, because I'm like, oh, that's the 14-year mark of the tribulation period. And, so then we could be expecting, we've worked, to get us ready. We've done the 14 years to get us ready to be the bride of Christ. And, so then, I was really hoping something would happen then, but nothing happened, and so then obviously you have to recalculate and stuff like that. But Groundhog Day definitely was a good picture of the tribulation period. Just, sometimes the seemingly endless, the endless feeling of, and then like the bad days always just kind of running into each other. I read recently where someone talked about that they um, compared Israel, and how Israel is like constantly dealing with its enemies around them. They compared that to an endless Groundhog Day, where they'll get in a short little war with them, and then they make a ceasefire, and then they, think everything's all fine and dandy, but then lo and behold, another attack pops up. So endless Groundhog Day in Israel. And so so the other thing about Groundhog Day is just kind of that idea of the repeat of history. Okay. And so feeling like, okay, so I wrote like first in your day-to-day life, just feeling like, history just keeps repeating itself. And then, like I said, Israel with its wars. And then I wrote, and especially now in America, are you feeling this sense of we're repeating history with our elections? Okay. When we went through this election cycle this year in 2024, was it a big deja vu for you? Did you feel like you've been through this before? Um, and I really do. I think it was a deja vu of, so we had Trump ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016. He ran against Biden in 2020. And then now this year, 2024, he's been running against Harris. Well, I especially think there's a lot of, I think it is a repeat of history. I definitely think with Hillary Clinton and Harris, I think there's a lot of connections there. Because one example is, well, I think both Hillary Clinton and Harris fulfilled the prophecies about the harlot in Babylon. So there was that. So he was running against women. Okay. And then the second thing was, okay, so do you remember when Hillary called us all, like the Trump followers? I mean, like pretty much anyone that wouldn't vote for her, she called us deplorables. Well, then in this election, we actually had Biden called the Trump followers, or like garbage floating in the ocean. So definitely a repeat of that picture. So anyways, and then the other thing too is the election is really close. And so I think that's a repeat. I don't remember how close. I don't, the election with Hillary and Trump might not have been that close. I mean, because I do remember for that one that Hillary did concede the next morning. Okay. So that one was over fast. But there is a kind of a repeat with Harris and Biden, where when Trump ran against Biden, it was close. Okay. So it took a few days after that election before we knew what the outcome was going to be. So definitely repeating that in history, because they all talked about how close it was. And then what was interesting is I had just been listening to a video that I did in 2022, um, which was right around when we did the midterm elections. And really why I was listening to that is because I've been looking at November 9th as like a very key prophetic date. And so I remember in 2022 just really thinking something was going to happen on November 9th. And so I wanted to know what I taught about that 2 years ago, why I was looking at that date, what I thought was significant about it. And so it was really interesting to me because pretty much mostly what I said in that video, I forget, like it's an hour and 45 minutes long, and probably everything I say for the first hour and a half in that video still applies today. And then it was really interesting with the 2022 midterm elections. They had a lot of the same language where it was like, these are the most important elections of your life, kind of thing. And we've been hearing that this year too with the elections, like these are, this is the most important election you ever see in your lifetime, kind of stuff. And so a lot of the same language, there was a lot of the same kind of fighting between the two sides. So just a lot of parallels between, and things going on in the world too, because I think there was hurricanes going on at the same time, and Biden had just done a bunch of stuff, done a couple of stuff in 2022 that was anti-Israel, and then now here we are in 2024 and he's done a bunch of anti-Israel stuff. So, definitely really interesting. And if you want to go back and listen to that video, I think it's called something like Last Days Prophecy. We're almost at the end or something like that. And so the date would be around November in 2022, because there's a lot of good information in there. I tried to repeat some of the information in here in this video. And so what I wanted to talk about in this video is I'm wondering, okay, so like I said, I think like we do read in the Bible that there's nothing new under the sun. And so history does tend to repeat itself, okay? And we've seen, like in the history of Israel, we've seen kind of a repeat of things in their history. And, so history does repeat itself, okay? I mean, man likes to think that they're evolving and getting better, but really they aren't. And so a lot of stuff is repeated because man is basically the same. I mean, you have sinners, and and then especially you have like people that want to run the world, like dictators and stuff like that. And so the evil tend to like, and this is, what's so bad about wanting to try to make peace deals with Israel's enemies is people don't recognize that evil people will just continue to do evil stuff. Okay. They don't reform. I mean, unless, God gets a hold of them and changes them. But mostly, like, the Bible teaches that a tree is known by their fruit, and teaches that, what are those two trees it uses? Like, you can't get, figs from a bramble. Like, oh, I can't remember. That was something that Jesus taught, is that you're going to get the same kind of fruit from the same kind of tree. And, but we don't, like, people in today's day, in this day and age, people don't believe the Bible, so they don't believe what Jesus taught. They don't really believe anyone's evil or wicked. They think all people are basically good inside. And so a lot of people just have it in their mind that we're just going to create, if we just get the right deal on the table and everybody signs up, that we could just have peace in the world. And it's just a fantasy, an infantile fantasy, because it's just not going to happen when you have evil people in the world. And God says until the very end, the wicked are going to be around. But that's kind of why Jesus comes back, is to get rid of the wicked. Okay. And I never hear anyone talking about the wicked going away. I mean, I rarely hear people talking about the wicked going away. I mean, even in Christianity these days, people are talking a lot about revival. And, so I think there's kind of this, just belief of people that, I don't know, I guess they think they're going to win souls and, just turn the world to follow God. And a lot of that's talked about without the Messiah. And that's just not what God teaches about the end times. I mean, basically in the end times, God, is going to allow the wicked to be in power, and it's all about the reason why the wicked are in power and have so much power is to train us up, to get us ready for the coming of the Messiah. But then at some point, God's going to be done with the wicked and they're going to go away, and, Jesus is going to take care of them. So that's what's going on. Okay, so I forgot how I got on this tangent, but basically, so are we seeing a repeat of history? And so one of the things and so this comes out of Revelation 11. And so one of the things that's interesting to me is that Revelation 11:14 says, the second woe is past, behold, the third woe is coming quickly. And so all the previous verses in Revelation 11 are talking about the second woe. And then the Bible goes on to say the third woe is coming quickly. But if you do a search for the third woe, it doesn't show up anywhere else in Revelation. Okay, so then you're like, well, what's the third woe? And so that has always kind of baffled me for a very long time, until I don't know when, just like 2 weeks ago or something like that. It was like all of a sudden I realized is that because what I'm starting to see with prophecy in the Bible is that I think prophecy in the Bible gets repeated too. I mean, because like I said, people are the same. And so what I think we're seeing in Revelation 11 is that everything that's listed in these verses, one has already happened, and I don't think people saw the fulfillment of them when they happened the first time. And then two, it's going to happen again. Okay. So I wrote, what is the third woe? What if it is a repeat of the second woe? And then, okay, so another thing that I'm realizing about prophecy in the Bible is that, okay, so sometimes God will make a list in a verse. And what I'm wondering is that sometimes with the list is that sometimes when the prophecy is fulfilled, maybe the first item in the list gets fulfilled, and then the second time the prophecy gets fulfilled, the second item in the list gets fulfilled. Okay, so for example, in Revelation 11:8, it says, their dead bodies will lie on the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So we have those two terms, Sodom and Egypt. And there is a lot of similarities between Sodom and Egypt. But what I'm wondering is, and so I have actually been thinking about this for a long time, is that I think the time of Egypt connects to the time of Trump. Okay. And the reason why I've been thinking that is because I've been feeling like Ever since we left the time of Trump, it's been like we've been wandering the wilderness, just like the Israelites, back in Exodus. And that there's been this group of people that have been dead set on wanting to return to the time of Trump, which to me reminds me of those people in the wilderness that wanted to go back to Egypt. Okay. And um, so then when I've been reading stuff in the Bible and we'll read about Egypt, it makes me think about Trump. Okay. Um, and that I think there might have been some prophecies that connect to Egypt that connect to the time of Trump. Okay. And then now I'm wondering if so if we have Egypt connected to Trump, is Sodom connected to Biden? Okay. So you could probably see that there are a lot more reasons why Biden would be connected to Sodom than maybe Trump. Okay. Because we definitely have Biden was pro homosexuality. Okay. Um, so I definitely think that Sodom could be a picture of Biden's time in the White House. Um, and definitely, because I don't know if you noticed this, but just definitely during the time of Biden's presidency, I mean, this country has just gone way downhill, and we have really turned into Sodom in this country. The commercials are terrible, the TV shows are terrible. So that's the deal with that. Okay, so then I thought what would be helpful is so let's talk about these verses and how they were fulfilled the first time, and then we will talk about how they may be being fulfilled. I mean, this week is what I think. Okay, now just really quickly, the first woe in Revelation is talking about the locust that torment for like 5 months. Okay, and I think the first woe, and I think it's the same thing with those prophecies, is that I think those are fulfilled twice. Because when you read about the locust, it talks about two names for the leader of the locusts, and one of them has a Greek name, and one of them has what's the other name? And the other one has a Hebrew name. So they have as king. So this comes from Revelation 9:11, which is fascinating. Okay. So it says they have king over them, the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek he has the name Apollyon. And so I'm actually wondering if the first time locusts show up, that if they're connected to, I'm wondering if the first name connects to Obama. Okay, Abaddon kind of sounds like Obama. Um, and I really think that happened during the time of Trump. Like, so Trump made his deal of the century, and then we had COVID, and then May 26th in 2020 was when we started having the BLM riots. Okay. And I definitely believe they were connected to Obama. Those people were connected to Obama, um, in a sense. And so I believe that was the first woe. Okay. Because then it says the first woe was past. Behold, two woes are still coming after these things. But I'm wondering if we're going to see a repeat of these verses, but this time the people are going to be connected to Trump. Okay. Um, and I think the reason why, like, so Trump has the Greek name Apollyon. And I think part of the reason why God does this is to kind of show that, um, like, I just really don't think there's that much difference between the right and the left. I think they're twins. And they do pretty much the same thing. And just so the left, can't get arrogant about what the right does, and just so the right can't get arrogant about what the left does, they end up doing the same things. is what I think. So, but I also think the chapter 9 in Revelation also goes on and talks about releasing the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. I think that's also talking about Trump's followers. And Euphrates connects to Biden, and I can't get into why right now. But the four angels that are bound, I think the um the four kind of connects to the four directions. Okay. And so basically after Trump was president, his people kind of scattered around the country into all four directions. Okay. And they were bound during the time of Biden. Okay. And so then at some point, and it says the sixth angel, this is verse 13, is going to sound, and and the a voice is going to tell the sixth angel to say, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So these people that are bound in all four directions by the Euphrates are going to be released. Okay. And I think that connects to Trump's people. And I don't think we've seen that happen yet. Okay. So that's the first woe. Okay, so let's talk about the second woe. Okay, so in Revelation 11, it says, then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Okay, so I don't, this was fulfilled because I believe by Trump, because, Trump was measuring Israel for his deal of the century. Okay. Then verse 2 goes on to say, and a lot of times I think God will kind of make a list. So that's a short list where verse 1 is about what Trump did, verse 2 is about what Biden did. Okay. And so then in verse 2 it says, leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. Okay. So and in that verse 2, it lists the court which is outside the temple. So the court outside the temple was called the court of the Gentiles. Okay, I think that connects to America. But then it says they will tread underfoot the holy city, and I think that connects to Israel. Okay, and so we did see with Biden that he treaded underfoot both America and Israel for 42 months. Okay. And we'll talk about the 42 months because obviously Biden's been around longer than 42 months. And so there's a connection with this prophecy of Moses breaking both tablets. Okay. Because I really think that Biden kind of broke both America and Israel with what he's been doing as president. Okay. One is, he really brought America to the edge of bankruptcy with all the money that he spent on all his programs and stuff. And then just in a general sense. And then with Israel too, he gave money to the Palestinians, he gave money to Iran. He really messed with Israel. And then all during this war, the 13 months of the war, well, in a couple days it'll be 13 months, he's been telling Israel what to do, and so they have not had the freedom to just fight the way they want to fight and to go against their enemies the way they wanted to go against their enemies. And so I really think he made it worse for them. So that's those two verses. Okay, so then God goes on to say, I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. So, for the longest time, and in my videos, I definitely teach that Trump and Netanyahu are the two witnesses. Okay. I mean, ultimately, the two witnesses are America and Israel. Okay. Or like the New Testament and the Old Testament, or Christians and Jews. Okay. All fit that concept of, the two witnesses. But we saw Trump and Netanyahu, Netanyahu was the leader of Israel and Trump was the leader of America, and their time frames overlapped, for quite a while. Okay, and they ended up doing a bunch of peace deals, quote unquote peace deals. Okay, and so there was a lot that went on when Trump was president. Okay, and so it's interesting that it says they will prophesy for 1,260 days. So look at that number 1,260, and you can parse that out to be 666. Okay, but 1,260 also can remind us of December 6th. And remember, that was the date that Trump said he was going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Okay. And so then it says these two witnesses were clothed in sackcloth. Okay. So I'm sure you've heard Trump talk about being the most persecuted person in the world. And Netanyahu feels the same way too, that he's highly persecuted. And he kind of is. And actually what's kind of interesting about that is that so just in the last couple of months, so we saw 2 assassination attempts on Trump in the last couple of months, and then 2 assassination. There's so many parallels between Trump and Netanyahu, and so there was 2 assassination attempts against Netanyahu, and one of them was so on October 19th there was a drone was launched around, well, there was a couple of drones that were launched around Netanyahu's house. Okay, so they believe one of the drones was trying to go after Netanyahu in his house. Fortunately, he wasn't in his house, so he was fine. I don't know if there was damage on the house. And then earlier than that, and I know I won't be able to find that in my notes, but the airport, when Netanyahu was flying back from something, there was rockets on the airport in Israel when he was flying back, and so that was, I don't know, like a month earlier or something like that. So we've seen 2 assassination attempts against Netanyahu too. So that's so maybe in a sense they deserve to wear sackcloth. Okay, so then it says, and these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. Okay, so I believe the Lord of the earth is Jesus. Okay, and for the longest time I didn't really get why it calls them both the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands. And once again, it wasn't until today that so if you know where the lampstand, okay, so I think this is a picture of right and left. There's so many pictures in the Bible with Jesus in the middle and people on the right of him and the people on the left of him. Okay, and so Jesus is in the middle, and there's 2 lampstands on the left, and there's 2 olive trees on the right. Okay, so I believe the 2 olive trees connect to Trump and Netanyahu, and the 2 lampstands connect to, okay, so some of the things you need to know about lampstands is the lampstand in the tabernacle had 7 lights. Okay, so that would connect to the 7th king. Okay, so I'm wondering if the 2 lampstands could either be Biden and Obama, so that would have been true during, like Obama's time. Okay, and then now we have Biden and Harris. Okay, and so we have that picture of right and left there. Okay, I don't know a whole lot about olive trees except that, I did look that up today, is that we do read about in Romans that Paul writes about kind of the wild olive branches and then the true natural branches. Okay, and so I really think that Trump and Netanyahu come from wild olive trees. Okay, is what I think. Okay, and so these verses would be true, for all these people at different points in time. Okay, so during the second woe, we started out with Trump and Netanyahu. So they were standing before the Lord of the earth, and then if anyone wanted to harm Trump or Netanyahu, they had fiery speech, okay, and they were able to devour their enemies, okay. Um, um, and then if anyone wanted to harm them, they got kind of killed in a way by their fiery speech. Like Liz Cheney is a good picture of someone who was quote unquote killed by Trump's fiery speech. Okay. And then it says, these have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. So to understand that rain's not falling, you got to understand the difference between mist versus rain. And I think Jesus brings the rain, and Trump and Netanyahu brought the mist. Okay. And so because Trump and Netanyahu were acting like messianic figures, they were stopping the rain from falling. Okay. People weren't paying attention to what Jesus was, saying in the word. They were too busy looking at Trump and Netanyahu as messianic type figures. Okay. And then it says they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desired. So Trump had 6 quote unquote peace deals, and so ended up bringing a bunch of plagues to America. Okay, like COVID came out of, was 7 weeks after the deal of the century. And so then there was other things too, like hurricanes and fires and stuff like that. So that's the deal with that. And then it says, okay, and so then it said when they had finished their testimony. Okay, so that's really more like when God decided that they finished their testimony, because obviously if it was up to Trump and Netanyahu, they would just keep going on forever. Okay, then it says the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. Okay, so so being in the abyss means you no longer have power. Okay. So if you understand that, so Obama and Biden had power during the 8 years of Obama. Okay. And then Trump came, and so they were trying to put Hillary into power, okay, because Obama had done his 8 years and he's not allowed to run anymore. So they were trying with Hillary, and Trump won that election, okay. And so really Obama and Biden really kind of went into the abyss, quote unquote, okay. They no longer had authority, okay. And then we had Trump came, and he was president, and he really undid a lot of the stuff that they had done, okay. But then it was like, so Trump had done his 6 peace deals in 2020, and so then it was like God said, okay, you're done, and it's for a season, okay, because we saw Obama and Biden disappeared for a season, but then Biden came back, and we read in the scripture about how God will allow people to return to complete the fullness of their sins. Okay, so Biden had to come to complete the fullness of the Obama Biden sins. Okay. And so Biden came out of the abyss, made war with them, basically had this fiery campaign. He overcame Trump and killed them. And so I actually think some of this might be true in Israel too, because we did have the left rose up. Yeah, the left did do the same thing in Israel, and rose up against Netanyahu because he lost power, like 70 weeks after the deal of the century. And then we had, because then Lapid was in power, because then Biden had signed a paper with Lapid in 2022. So something similar happened in Israel where the left rose up and basically kicked Netanyahu out. Okay. And so and what's interesting about this verse is that the beast coming out of the abyss. It's Revelation 11:7, and November 7th in 2020 was when they declared Biden the winner. So that's very interesting. And so think of making more as, fiery campaign. So, I mean, it was almost worse in Israel too, the campaigning between left and right and, stuff like that. So that's the deal with that. And then, okay, so is this, why did I bring this in here? Oh, because this connects to verse 2, the 42 months, treading underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So so I had actually been wondering, like, since I believe that Biden is the beast from the sea, I knew that he had authority to act for 42 months. So I was calculating to try to figure out when his 42 months ended. And what's interesting is that we saw in July, so July 19th was, well, I guess really July 20th was 42 months after Biden's inauguration at noon. Okay. And so that was July 19th or 20th, sorry, July 20th. 42 months. It's actually 42 months, one day inclusive after Biden's inauguration. And so it was interesting because then the next day on July 21st was when Biden ended his reelection campaign. So I thought we were done with Biden, okay, because then, we had Trump at the RNC. Biden had his 42 months, but then really he didn't disappear. It's like then he started just pressing even harder on Israel to try to get Israel to do what he wanted. And so it's like, okay, this doesn't make sense to me. So I figured that 42 months, that there was another 42 months we were looking for. Okay. And so that's what I found is, so on April 7th, okay, and so a lot of times, like Biden was the 7th king. And so we saw him do key things on dates with 7 in it. Okay. So on April 7th in 21, he restored aid to the Palestinians. Okay. So Trump had, cut the aid. And then Biden did so much stuff to turn around a lot of the stuff that Trump did. Okay. But of course, Trump did a lot of stuff to turn around the stuff that Obama and Biden did. So, anyways, and so then what we see if we do calculations, 4/7/21 to 10/6/24 is 42 months. Okay. So then, but then you don't know with 42 months, is it 42 months in one day? Is it 42 months in 29 days? It's because it's kind of a generic time frame. And so one thing that was really significant that stood out to me is that 43 months will be November 6th, okay, which is the day after the election. So I really think that this election is really going to kind of be the thing that kind of brings the end to Biden, okay? What's also interesting about November 6th is, sorry, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but sometimes trying to figure out the order is hard. We'll get back to the second woe, okay? So don't forget where we were at. Okay. And so 11/6 is also 21 days after the first day of Sukkot. So in Daniel, Daniel 21 connects to like the king of Persia. I definitely think that number connects to Biden when you read about 21 in the scripture. Okay. And so Daniel talks about like mourning for 21 days. And so I think that's a picture of like mourning during the time of Biden's presidency. And then on the 24th day, Daniel has a messianic type encounter. And I think that number 24 connects to Trump or the return of Trump. Okay. And so um and so we were able to, and see, this is why, I told you I was looking at um Sukkot, because there was two different 21 and 24 numbers during the time of Sukkot. And so I was really looking at those time frames. But then, Jesus didn't return. And that's in one of my previous videos where I talk about that. Um, um, but then I was able to find, that if you count from the first day of Sukkot, you get 21 days brings you to 11/6, and then 24 days brings you to 11/9, which is very, 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 very interesting. Okay. So I was excited to discover that. Okay. The other thing too is 11/6 is also the start of week 121 after Biden signed the paper with Lapid. And so we read, right before the flood, God gives him 120 years, and so I think Biden only gets 120 weeks after he signed this paper. And so that's why I'm really looking at tomorrow, 11/6, being kind of the downfall of Biden. Okay. Um, that, I mean, he might still be around, but I think God is really going to take away his power. So, anyways, and then 11/6 is also the 13th month of the war in Israel on the Gregorian calendar. Okay. So, I mean, so if you do it from 10/7 to 11/7, that's 13 months. Okay. But, if you actually know how to do calculations, it always ends up being like the day before. So 11/6 would be the 13th month. 11/7 would be 13 months, 1 day after the start of the war, if you're counting the first day of the war on 10/7. And so we read about, in Genesis 14, we read about 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but the 13th year they rebelled. And so I had actually been looking at this because I'm like, okay, so I think like we have this picture of, so during the war they followed what Biden said during the war for 12 months, but then in the 13th month they're going to rebel. Okay. And we actually did see a little picture of that on the 13th month on the Hebrew calendar. We saw in Israel that they were starting to rebel against Biden, and I think they still kind of are, because so the 13th month was the Lul this year because it was a leap year. Okay. So that started on September 4th and went through October 2nd was when it ended. Okay. And so we saw them starting to, just really hit hard, both against Gaza and against Lebanon. Like they weren't listening as much to Biden. Except they did when they had problems with Iran. I think they were kind of they did kind of listen too much, because Biden was like, don't hit Iran's nuclear facilities and don't hit their oil facilities. And it seemed like in their when they retaliated for Iran's attack, they didn't go after the nuclear facilities or the oil facilities. But we have another 13th month time frame coming up, which is on the Gregorian calendar, which is 11/6 or 11/7. I mean, it would be the start of the 13th month, and so we might see a bigger type of rebellion against Biden. Okay. And especially like, so, with this election, we've been hearing a lot where, I think they've said in Israel that they were kind of waiting to see what was happening in the election in America. And they even said that Iran was waiting to see what happened with the election. So a lot kind of is, riding on the results of the election. I mean, basically, because I think people are afraid of Trump. Okay, like Iran is afraid of Trump. Okay, so I think they're going to um um they'll probably behave more if Trump wins the election. Um, and then Israel might rebel more against Biden if Trump wins the election. So, so there you go. And then, I just threw this in here too because it was the next verse, Genesis 14:5. I mean, I actually left it out at first because I didn't know, like, 14th year. I don't know what the number 14 connects to, but then I'm like, oh, duh, it connects to the time of the tribulation. Um, so then it says, in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and defeated, these people. And so I think that's a picture of like the end of 14 years. So when Jesus returns, we're going to defeat a group of people. Because it was a war with 4 kings versus 5 kings. And so this one king was able to defeat these other kings in the 14th year. And so that could be a picture of how we're going to have some, we're going to win when Jesus returns. So, okay. So that's this slide. And so here's just a quote about the beast from the sea. There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. Okay, so he's definitely arrogant. He said some blasphemous stuff about Israel, some lies about Israel, and so then he had authority to act for 42 months. Okay, so back to the second woe. So I backed up here just so we could refresh where we were. So the 2 witnesses have finished their testimony. The beast came out of the abyss, made war with them, and overcame them and killed them. Okay? And so then it goes on to say, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Those from the people and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. Okay, so why did they? Okay, so in that election in 2020, so we had the election was, okay, so I wrote it here. So 11/3 was the election. 11/4 to 11/7 is 3.5 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Early on Saturday, they declared Biden the winner. Okay, why? Okay, so that was different than previous elections because we're always waiting for the current, for the loser to concede. Okay, and Trump would not concede the election. Okay, so then everyone was kind of waiting around like, who won the election? What's going on? Okay, and so then on Saturday, I don't know, some like newspaper decided to declare Biden the winner, and so that's what happened. Okay, and that was on 11/7. Okay, so so we saw the fulfillment of this prophecy back in 2020. Okay, and then it says those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these 2 prophets tormented those who dwelled on the earth. So the people on the left, they hated Trump and Netanyahu and were tormented when Trump was in power. Okay, so then when Biden got back in power, they started rejoicing and celebrating. And then so they sent gifts to one another. Okay, so I wrote sent gifts is a picture of spending America's money for their leftist causes. Okay, because we definitely saw that during the time of Biden. Okay. But then it says, after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. Okay, so so the breath of life from God came into Biden, and he stood on his feet, or the breath of life from God came into the newspaper that declared Biden the winner, and then he stood on his feet. So, which means he has power. Okay, on 11/7, Biden was declared the winner and started ruling. And then great fear fell upon those who were watching. So I highlighted watching, okay, because whenever you see eyes, you want to think of Trump's followers because they're the two witnesses. When you read about ears, that connects to Biden's followers, okay. And then it says they heard a loud voice from heaven. So hearing a loud voice from heaven would be Biden's followers hearing him saying, "Come up here." And so they went up into heaven in the cloud. Okay. Um, but I also think going up into heaven in the cloud, I always think of the cloud connecting to the deluding influence. Okay. And so this also became true for Trump's followers, is that they went up into the cloud because they started believing the big lie that Trump said about the election. Um, and so they were under this delusional influence. And then we saw, and then it says their enemies watched them. So we watched them go crazy on January 6th. Okay. Um, and then it says, in that hour there was a great earthquake. Okay, so the earthquake would be a switch from the right to the left in America. It said a tenth of the city fell. Okay, the 10 without faith. Okay, so 10 connects to 10 horns, which would be like the military branch. But it also connects to when they sent witnesses, when Israel sent witnesses to the promised land, there was 10 without faith and 2 with faith. Okay, so that's, so when you think of the tenth of the city fell, so the 10 without faith, which would be like the Trump followers, started believing Trump's big lie. They fell and started believing this lie. They stopped following Jesus and started following Trump or whatever. It says 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. So sometimes with prophecy, it's either metaphoric or it's literal. Okay, so this first time around, it was metaphoric. Okay, so 7,000 people were quote unquote killed. They weren't actually killed, but they kind of lost power or whatever. And so we read about with 7,000, we read about the 7,000 connects to the remnant that still follow God. There's verses that talk about that God, if you look up 7,000 in the Bible, you'll find the story where God talks about the 7,000 being the remnant that still follow God. Okay, and then it says the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, the third woe is coming quickly. Okay, so see how that was fulfilled in 2020. Okay, so now we'll talk about this year. Okay, so it says, okay, so I left the first part, the 1260 days connected to Trump and Netanyahu. But then we read about the 2 lampstands, okay, because these following verses can also connect to Biden and Harris, okay, who that stand, they're the 2 lampstands, okay. If anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours the enemy. I mean, so Biden and Harris have fiery speech, just like Trump and Netanyahu. When they're able to kind of quote unquote kill people by their fiery speech. They also have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. So same thing where, people are looking at Biden and Harris as messianic figures and not listening to Jesus. Okay. But there's also a literal thing too, where because of, so then it says they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. So Biden's Saudi deal and nonstop trying to get a ceasefire for the war in Israel and his actions toward Israel, in terms of giving money to Iran, supporting the Palestinians, and then also Biden telling Israel what they can and cannot do in the war. So all that stuff has brought plagues, hurricanes, and fires to America. Okay. And talked about this in my last video about how the fathers eat grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Because it's kind of annoying that, um, Biden does all these sins and then, kind of the the Americans get, the judgment out of that. It seems unfair, okay? Unless you understand that, um, we're being trained, we're getting prepared for the coming of the Messiah, and then also God's going to make up for the years that the locusts have eaten, okay? So hang in there. I know it's hard. It seems unfair, but God's going to make up for it, okay? And then it says, when they have finished their testimony. Okay, so now it's Biden and, I really think Harris just had this short little, flash in the pan thing, just like Hillary. Okay. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss. Okay, so now Trump has been in the abyss and he will come back out and overcome Biden and Harris too. Okay. We already saw a fulfillment of this. Okay. This was already done in the debate between Trump and Biden on June 27th. Okay. Because, then everyone freaked out and told Biden to drop out of the race on June 28th. Okay. But it might also happen by Trump beating Harris in the 2024 election, and also by Trump starting a civil war. Okay. Because we read about the beast, the eighth king, really, and the 10 horns. They hate the harlot and they will burn her up with fire. Okay. So it says, when they have finished their testimony. So the third woe might actually be even more woeful, well, if you could say that, than the second woe. Okay. Because then it says, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss, Trump, will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. I mean, so we saw make war could be the debate. Make war was campaigning. Okay. But is there going to be a literal war for the third woe? Question mark. We'll see what happens. Okay. And then it says, their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom. Okay, the time of Biden is like Sodom. Okay. Oh, I already talked about this. And then, so Revelation 11:9. So I highlighted 9 because that's 11:9. Okay, November 9. Okay. Those from the people, tribes, tongues, and nation will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. Okay. Now, first of all, this has already been fulfilled because Biden was forced to drop out of the race on July 21st, and it is 3.5 months to the election. Okay. So we've already been looking at Biden's dead body for 3.5 months. Okay. So maybe this is how it's fulfilled. Okay. Because, and same thing, Biden won't stay in the tomb. Okay. He keeps crawling out. Okay. Same thing, Biden would not allow himself to be stifled, so he continued to try to do stuff, especially telling Israel what to do. Okay. But, well, we also see a repeat of the election happens and then there's 3.5 days where no one knows who won. Okay, or lost or whatever. Okay, we'll see. Okay. But if it doesn't mean that it hasn't been fulfilled, because it was already fulfilled by the 3.5 months of Biden. Okay. And then it says, those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So, so kind of a reverse. So now it's Trump's people celebrating because Biden and Harris or Biden and Obama tormented them. Okay. And then it says, after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them and they stood on their feet. And great fear fell upon those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, come up here. Then they went up to heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. Okay. So after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into him, and they stood on their feet. Will Trump win the election? How soon will they until they stand on their feet? The feet relates to the statue in Daniel, the end of the prophecy. 11/6 is an important date, but also 11/9. Let's see what happens on those days. Okay. Um, um, and then so Great Fear. I mean, obviously, if Trump and his followers kind of like stand on their feet, like if we see a repeat of January 6th, obviously those people watching are going to be afraid. Okay. And then it says they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And then they went up to heaven in the cloud. Okay. So once again, I think of a cloud being a delusional influence. So are we going to see a second January 6th type event? Because these people they're waiting for Trump to say the right thing, and then they'll just jump into action. Okay. So I wanted to do a video where I talked about how the Trump followers, I don't remember, I might have talked about this in the last video, but how they came out of you had the QAnon people, you had the right wing, like the racist on the right side. See, whenever I want to do this, I can't remember what they're all called. But the QAnon, and then we had a bunch of like the Alex Jones, the preppers, you know, uh, um, all those. There was just this whole group of people that all kind of became Trump followers. Okay, so just like right wing extremists, the QAnon people, the people believing conspiracy theories, the people believing Pizzagate conspiracy theory. There was a lot of false prophets that were following Trump. And so there's, this whole collection of people just all kind of came together to follow Trump. Okay. And, and then we had Trump kind of fed into like the QAnon people, where he actually used like some terms from QAnon at various times. And so it got the QAnon followers all excited. I mean, there's a whole thing that you could teach on about how we're seeing, kind of this cult being played out, just on a national level. Okay. Well, maybe even bigger than that, because, Trump does have followers around the world. And and so we saw on January 6th, how, everyone's kind of like waiting, for Trump to give the word, like the QAnon people are waiting for the storm. Okay. They call it the storm. And, so they believe Trump will initiate the storm, which is an attack against the deep state actors responsible for the global pedophile cabal, or whatever that word is. Um, so, they're looking to Trump to, just attack their enemies, basically. Okay. So all they have to do, there's Trump. And, whenever God allows him to do that at some point, like January 6th, God, obviously had his hand on January 6th and kept it small. Okay. But I really think it was like kind of just a foretaste of what's coming in the future. Okay. And at some point, I think God's going to allow, the fullness of their sins. Okay. The fullness of these crazy nuts that follow Trump. Okay. And so, like I said, I believe the terrors followed, are the Trump followers. Okay. Um, and, and so the Jesus followers, we all kind of look at the Trump followers and just think, oh my gosh. So although I do believe there's some people that follow Trump, like, okay, I'm going to try to find these verses because I didn't get to make a slide of this, but I wanted to put this in here. So I'm looking at Matthew 24. It says, Um, okay. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then there be two men in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one will be left. Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. Okay. Um, so I figured out kind of what I think these mean. Okay. Um, so um the two men in the field, I think that connects to Trump's followers. Okay. um that, I mean, right now they're in the abyss or they're in the field until God gives them power again. Okay. And then it says one will be taken and one will be left. I think we're going to rescue some of the Trump followers out of the fire. Okay. Or Jesus is, I guess you should say. And then this concept of two women grinding at the mill, so that connects back to so if you look at manna, so I think manna is opposed to, Jesus says he's the bread of life, and then manna is what God fed us in the wilderness. So I think manna connects to like Trump's words in the wilderness or Netanyahu's words in the wilderness. Okay. And what they did with manna is they would take it and they would bake it, or they would um, fry it up, or whatever. They did all these different things to it, or they grind it in a mill. Okay. And so they took the words of Trump and they ground them, or they baked them, or they fried them up, or whatever. I mean, they just kind of messed around, because a lot of times when they're reporting things that Trump said, they didn't get it accurate. Okay. And so these people grinding at the mill would be Biden's followers. Okay. And one will be taken and one will be left. So we'll get some of the Biden followers in Jesus's Sukkot when he comes back. So all is not lost. I mean, just in case you have relatives that you're like, oh my gosh, how can you follow Trump? He's just a nutcase. Or how can you follow Biden? He's so evil. He's so mean to Israel. Um, so why did I start saying that? Okay. Okay. So then, oh yeah, because where was I at? Will Trump win the election? How soon will they stand on their feet? Let's see. Okay, so I was talking about they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." Then they went up to heaven in the cloud, which is the delusional influence, is a second January 6th type event, but this time they are successful, maybe. And maybe that's a type of civil war. Okay, and their enemies watch them. And in the hour there was a great earthquake, a switch from the left to the right. Okay, in America, and or civil war. Okay, a tenth of the city fell. Okay, so we read about the 10 horns hate the harlot and burn her up with fire. Okay, 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. So this time I'm wondering with the third woe, if the 7,000 connects to the seventh king's followers, which I think the seventh king is Biden. Okay, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, and then this is the third woe. Okay. But I also think there's another fulfillment, because I think this, you can also see, you like, well, with this verse, like verse 12, it says, after the 3.5 days the breath of life from God came into him, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. I think we're also going to see fulfillment with Jesus's followers, because I think that God's going to breathe life back into us. And so I don't know what the 3.5 days would connect to, like, well, maybe November 6th to November 9th, because it's like half a week. Okay. And so we're going to get the breath of life of God into us, and we're going to stand on our feet. And then and then obviously people are going to be afraid, when the Jesus followers kind of are resurrected. And we're going to hear a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." Jesus is going to call us into his sukkah. Okay. And then when we go up in the heaven in the cloud, it's because Jesus is the reaper on the cloud. Okay, we have two different reapers. I mean, we have Trump's going to be reaping his people, and then Jesus is going to be reaping his people, his followers. Okay. Um, so there you go. Um, so, um, anyways, and so there is kind of hidden in the scripture this concept of the resurrection of the wicked. Okay. Because in First Thessalonians we read, "For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord." So that would be all those people didn't follow Trump as their Messiah, didn't follow Biden as their Messiah, didn't follow Netanyahu, didn't follow Harris. We've been waiting and remaining until the coming of the Lord. Okay. We will not precede those who had fallen asleep. So the first resurrection is actually the dead in Christ will rise first. And so that would be the Trump followers. Okay. I mean, you know, um, I think there's a literal meaning of these verses, where I think maybe I don't really know, but maybe the literal would be like, the people that died before us rise first. But then I think the dead in Christ could also be the Trump followers. They'll rise first, okay? Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds. We'll go to Jesus's cloud. He's reaping us on his cloud. And so we shall always be with the Lord. Okay. So the harvesters are on the clouds. Which harvester reaper will you join? Okay. Okay. Because we read about the wheat and the chaff. And Jesus says, "Allow both to grow together until the harvest, and in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, first gather up the tares." Okay, the tares get gathered up first, "and bind them up in bundles to burn them up." So they kind of get thrown into the fiery furnace. Okay, but then Jesus says, "But gather the wheat into my barn." Okay. Um, okay, so, and we read about in the fiery furnace in Daniel, we read there's 4 people loosed in the fiery furnace, and I saw that there's a connection to 9/11. Okay. So remember that 3 guys were thrown into the fiery furnace. Okay. The furnace was heated 7 times. I think that connects to Biden because of what he was doing. He caused the furnace in Israel, the wars in Israel, to just be hotter. Okay. And so these 3 guys were thrown into the burning fire. Okay, they were tied up. Okay. And they fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, tied up. Okay, so the tied up concept connects to that those in Israel can't live their lives because of the war. Okay. But then Nebuchadnezzar was astounded and stood up in haste, and he stood up. Okay, remember, stood, feet. Okay. He said to his high officials, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" And they said, "Yeah." And he said, "Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods." Okay. So the 4 that are loosed in the fire connect to the 4 planes on 9/11, or the 4 entities on 9/11, because we had 2 towers, which I think connect to Trump and Biden. We had the Pentagon got hit by a plane that could connect to Netanyahu. The plane crashing into the field in Pennsylvania could connect to Harris, because I think she's kind of short-lived on this earth. Okay. Because there's a connection with Pennsylvania to Harris. I mean, the capital of Pennsylvania is Harrisburg. Okay. The plane that crashed into the field crashed left of the Capitol. So there's a connection to the left. Okay. Um, anyways, but then we see at the end of the fiery furnace that there's three people that come out of the fiery furnace that aren't connected by the fire, that aren't affected by the fire. Okay. And so that would be Trump. I mean, sorry, that would be Jesus and his followers because, um, I mean, I think we have Jesus and the Jewish people that follow him and the Christians that follow him. So like three groups. Okay. Um, okay, and then we read about the thief in the night. Okay, so you know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. So let us not sleep as others do. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, Trump's peeps, and those who get drunk at night. That would be Biden's peeps. So why did I put this in here? Anyway, so that, because like I said, I think Jesus and Trump are coming at the same time. Okay. That Trump would be like the thief in the night. Um, and it says while they were saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. Um, so I wrote peace and safety is a picture of Biden running around trying to get a ceasefire and a two-state solution. We also saw there was a two-state solution conference in Saudi Arabia, October 30th to 31st. That is such a big picture of the Tower of Babel, because oh man, what did they say? There was something like 90 um, countries and organizations all part of this two-state solution conference. I mean, it started at earlier, they had oh, what was it? Some conference. Let's see if I can find it. They had some conference where everybody was all meeting at. All the world leaders came, and so they started talking. There then at this big, and I think even Netanyahu spoke at the conference too. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find um the conference in my notes when it was. Um, so, I mean, so there's all these world leaders and stuff, all, um, trying to, they want to push the two-state solution onto Israel. Okay. And so, um, sorry, I went through all my calendars and couldn't find it. Um, so, anyways, I mean, so you know, oh, okay, here's what it says on my notes: 90 states and organizations. So yeah, they want to force this two-state solution on to Israel. And obviously we know what God thinks about it, and so He's definitely going to put a stop to that. So I mean, I definitely think, um, so Genesis 11 is the Tower of Babel, and it talks about the tower and the city. And I think of the tower connects to Trump and the city connects to Biden. And so God, um, I mean, I think we saw a fulfillment of that when, when God used Biden to put a stop to Trump and everything he was doing. Because it talks about confusing their language, and so Trump and his followers, kind of, I mean, that's when they got the diluting influence. But we're definitely going to see more, same thing. We're going to see more fulfillments of that. And so with Saudi Arabia, it's interesting because, um, so they are actually trying to build a tower, which would be just a really giant mosque, for people to, I mean, it's going to be a mosque plus a shopping center and stuff like that. And I can definitely see God putting an end to that being built. But then also, like the city, that would be them trying to get this two-state solution for the Palestinians. And so I definitely think God's going to put a stop to that. Okay. So we'll see how that gets fulfilled with Saudi Arabia. Um, um, and then, so what's interesting is like, so Spain's kind of a good example because they were one of these countries that were in on, all talking about the two-state solution and stuff. I mean, I actually have this whole list of, oh, I might be able to see it in, because here's all that Spain did. Okay. So on October 29th, Spain canceled, they had a $6.5 million contract with Israel, an Israel military company, to buy ammunition, and they canceled it because of the Gaza conflict. Okay. Um, and then Spain is also a member of the EU, which signed, okay, so they had this 21-day ceasefire thing, you know, in September, on 9/25 in September, they were going to force a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Um, and then on May 22nd of this year, Spain, Ireland, and Norway, I call them the Sin countries, they recognized a Palestinian state. Okay. And then um, and then they were also part of this two-state, conference because they're part of the EU in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so Spain had lots of things against Israel. Okay, and so so now we saw devastating flooding, like the day before on October 29th, and then it's still going on. They're still getting flooding, like um in, oh, I forget the name of the big city in Spain. Okay, so you don't want to mess with Israel. So it would be interesting to kind of follow some of these other countries that have been part of this two-state solution conference to see, how God brings about judgment. I think with like Spain, so Spain's like a Catholic country. I think sometimes God's going to bring judgment on his people first before we see judgment like on the Arabs and the Muslims and stuff like that. Um, is kind of what I think. So, oh, but another thought that I had is I wonder too if we're going to see, because I applied this to Biden, running around saying peace and safety. And they definitely even use those words in this conference in Saudi Arabia, peace and safety. But then one thought I had was, maybe Trump's followers are going to be saying peace and safety if they think Trump like won the election, and then God's going to bring sudden destruction on them. So, don't know. We'll see how that happens. Um, okay, I talked about Kamala being the mother of harlots. Okay. Um, and okay, so Kamala likes to make, like, she's been kind of campaigning under the thing of like, I'm just like you, I'm just an average person. I think she's trying to contrast to Trump, because obviously you could paint a picture really good that Trump's, this rich guy and hangs around with the rich people, obviously. But it just didn't work with Kamala because you'd see her with Oprah, and Taylor Swift was supporting her, and Michelle Obama and Lady Gaga. I mean, the DNC had all the who's who in the Democrats. Um, so, anyways, but we saw so many abortion commercials paid for by Kamala. Um, and then, okay, so these are the verses that talk about, okay, the beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth and is of the seven, and he goes to destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings which have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. Okay. Um, so, the day of the Lord, I mean, we read about that concept of 1 hour. Well, 1 hour is 60 minutes. So that's definitely a connection to Trump's followers, Trump and his followers. Okay, that number 6. But we definitely know the day of the Lord is like a day or it's 1 hour. I mean, judgment is going to happen fast when it starts. Um, but we'll all be safe in Jesus's Sukkah. So, okay. And then 3 days and 3 more days. Okay. So we read about in Genesis 40 about the cupbearer and the baker. Okay. Um, and so it says, it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Okay, so I think Pharaoh's like a picture of God being mad at Trump and Biden, okay, for these quote unquote peace deals that they have done. So we put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. Okay, so they were kind of thrown into the abyss in the same place where God's people are imprisoned. Okay. Um, the captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Um, so I'm not really sure who Joseph would be. When you first read about these two people, you can apply it to Trump and Netanyahu, and then Joseph gets put in charge, which would be Biden being put in charge. But I'm also realizing we're in a day and age where both Trump and Biden are kind of in the abyss right now. But then I don't know who's in charge of them. So who's in charge? I don't know who's in charge in America. Um, anyways, so then we see the cupbearer and the baker each have a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, each dream with his own interpretation. Okay, so both sides in the election have their own interpretation of who would be best to run America. I also wonder too if a fulfillment of that is both sides in the election are going to have their own interpretation of who won the election. So we'll see what happens. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. Okay, so in the morning, are we not going to know who won the election? Are we going to need someone to interpret the election findings? Okay, he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, why are your faces so sad today? Then they said to him, we have had a dream and there is no one to interpret it. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. Okay. So the cupbearer's dream is he saw a vine with 3 branches. Okay. Well, that connects to the lulav that is shaken on Sukkot. Okay. So Genesis 40 is there's definitely a Sukkot picture in Genesis 40. Okay. And so then the cupbearer says, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. So a cup could be a picture of the cup of judgment. Okay. So I really think that Trump was used to bring judgment to the left. Okay. In his first presidency, and then we're going to see him return to bring judgment, like final judgment to the left. And so then Joseph interprets a dream, and he said the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. So Trump will win, Well, I wrote Trump wins election to bring judgment to Biden and Harris, question mark. Does he win the election, or is there some other way God's going to restore him to his office to bring judgment to Biden and Harris? And then he said, you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand. Okay, that would be like the cup of judgment, according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. I mean, so it kind of is implying that we'll see kind of like a return, of Trump being, like a president to bring, anyways, just a return of Trump bringing judgment on the left. Okay. And then only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Okay. So that could actually just be a picture of God's people, like, okay, I want to get out of this, jail. Okay. So we're seeing that people are hoping that Trump, like definitely Trump followers are kind of resting their hope on him to set him free. Okay. We're also seeing people are hoping Trump will get the hostages in Israel released. Okay. Um, so then, and then it goes on to say, then the chief baker, when the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw my dream, and behold, there was 3 baskets of white bread on my head, and in the top basket all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. And the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Okay. So I have a picture of the guy with 3 baskets with bread on his head. Okay. So the 3 baskets connect to 3 sukkahs. Okay, and Biden Sukkah. So Biden Sukkah is the top Sukkah. Okay, so like the bottom Sukkah would be Obama's Sukkah. The middle one would be Trump's, and then the top one is Biden's. Okay. Um, and so everybody's kind of in their own, they're picking a Sukkah to be in. Okay. But what we saw in Biden's sukkah, there's a picture of God's people in Israel being eaten by the birds. So the bread, which the Jewish people connect to the bread, the body of Christ. Okay, they were being eaten by their enemies. Okay, and then it says in the top basket there was some of all sorts of baked food, and I also talked about baked food also connects to baking Trump's words, manna. Okay. Anyways, so both these dreams, there's this concept of 3 days and 3 more days. Okay, so the 3 days could connect to the time of Obama, Trump, Biden. Okay, and then there's still 3 more days after that. Okay, so that could connect to November, 6th, 7th, 8th, or is that the right days, or 7, 8, 9, or whatever the 3 days are? Well, I guess I have the 6th is the 21st, so the 3 days would be 7, 8, 9. Okay. So then it says, thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to him. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay. So the 3rd day, so November 9th, so like I said, November 7th, 8th, and 9th. The 3rd day would be November 9th. That is, when you talk about that being Pharaoh's birthday, that was the date that Trump was announced that he was the winner in 2016. Okay, so are we going to see a repeat in history? Okay. And then and then it said he made a feast for all his servants. Okay, so I put in this verse in Jeremiah that talks about a feast. Okay, and the feast is okay. It says, when they became heated up, I will serve them their banquet and make them drunk, that they may become jubilant and may sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake up, declares the Lord. And I will bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams together with male goats. Okay, so maybe the rams are the Trump followers and the male goats are the Biden followers. Anyways, so it's not a happy banquet that God's going to serve them. Okay. So you could read more of Jeremiah 51 if you want to find out more about that. And then, then it says the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So I wrote, Trump and his followers don't remember Jesus the Messiah, and they try to establish their own messianic kingdom, which really ends up just turning into a civil war, basically. Okay. I mean, they end up making a mess. I mean, they end up destroying things because the 8th king is called the destroyer. But then they also end up going to war against Jesus and his followers, which is fascinating. So, Kind of bizarre. Um, okay, so three Sukkots, or there's also, or that concept of time times and half a time, so I wrote October 17th and 23 was Sukkot, and then there's 2 more weeks take us to November 6th, with the day after the election. And then 3 more days would be half a week, which is 11/7, 11/8, and 11/9, because 11/9 is the 24th day after day one of Sukkot. Also, half a week would connect to the middle of the week that we're looking for. Okay. So, because we read in Daniel, I don't remember what chapter in Daniel, where he makes a covenant. I think it's Daniel 9. He makes a covenant with the many for 1 week and then puts a stop to sacrifice and grain offering in the middle of that week. And so what I'm thinking is that Biden only gets 120 weeks, okay, after he signed the paper with Lapid. Okay, and so that ends on 11/6, and then we move into week 121 on November 7th, okay, or the 6th. I mean, it depends on if you're counting from Thursday to Thursday, because he signed it on a Thursday, and November 7th is a Thursday, so that's 121 weeks after he signed that paper with Lapid, okay. Um, and so then 11/9 would be the middle of that week 121, okay. So so this concept of three Sukkots, or 3 weeks comes, we see the 3 baskets on the head of the baker. Um, Peter mentions 3 tabernacles or 3 sukkahs, okay, at the transfiguration. Noah sends out dove 3 sets of 7 days. Okay, so we see that concept of 3 weeks. Well, so there's, I guess, some kind of mix in my metaphors, because there's either 3 sukkahs or there's 3 weeks. Okay, Noah sends out a dove for 3 weeks. 3 sets of 7 days. There's 3 shofar sounds. 3 times they celebrate the feast. Yeah, I'm mixing a lot of stuff in here. And then we read with Solomon, they observe the feast they observe the feast for 7 days, and then another 7 days they dedicated the altar. I think there's a hidden, so I put in the Second Chronicles verses, but the same story is told in Second Kings, I think. And so I think there's a hidden 3 weeks in the telling of that story too. So, um, and then with 3 boosts, you have Jesus and the 2 thieves, Joseph plus 2 others in jail. We have Moses and Aaron and Miriam. Um, um, and so Ezra, okay, in the book of Nehemiah, we see Ezra standing at a wooden podium, and he had 6 people on his right hand and 7 people on his left hand. So that definitely connects to the 6th king and the 7th king, okay, where Trump's on the right and Biden's on the left. So that's pretty cool. And then the man of lawlessness, I think, definitely connects to, so we see Esther, she says, "Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast in the same way." So that same concept of 3 days, night or day. And then, "And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." So I think we see the lawless people returning, on the 3rd day. Okay. And then in Mark, we read, "The day is coming when you will see the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing where he should not be. Reader, pay attention." This is the NLT translation. "Then those who in Judea must flee to the hills." Okay. Flee to the mountains where your help comes from. Flee to Jesus. Okay. Anyways. So this is a picture of, I mean, like Trump took these documents. I mean, he's him and his followers, I think, are like the Romans, that they want to get the things in the house, of God for themselves. I mean, but we've also saw the same thing with Biden. I mean, like I said, they're twins. They do really similar stuff. Um, and then God says, but don't go either to the left or the right. Um, observe what God commanded you. Um, and so then we also read in the Gospels about there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be the greatest. Okay, doesn't that remind you of the campaign? Okay, um, you know, um, definitely either the Trump side or the Harris side, disputing as to which one of them is the greatest. Um, and then, so don't go to the right or the left. The left believes in climate change, the right believes the deep state is controlling the weather. We want to be in the middle with Jesus, believing biblical truths, and Jesus said, okay, or in Deuteronomy, it says, why has the Lord done this to the land? Why this great outburst of anger? So we want to see this recognition of, that God's the one who brings the weather. Okay. Therefore, the anger of the Lord burned against the land to bring upon it every curse which is written in the book. Okay. And why did that happen? Because they forsook the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods whom they have not known and whom he had not allotted to them. So that's why we're getting severe weather patterns, okay? And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with outstretched arm and with great terror and with signs and wonders. Um, and then God said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me, and how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? I mean, the good news is that in the last days we're going to see more of these signs, but it means we're just, and so we've been seeing that the hurricanes, they've had tornadoes in Oklahoma, fires in California, they say are getting really bad. um but the good news is it means we're in the last days. um and then we see three groups of people assembling, or three guys assembling people for the civil war at Armageddon. Okay, so I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, three unclean spirit like frogs, spirits of demons, performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. And they gathered them together to the place which is in Hebrew is called Har Mageddon. Um, so I wondered if the dragon is Obama and the beast is Biden and the false prophet is Trump, is what I'm wondering. And then then in Daniel 5, we read about, so Belshazzar, he was definitely drinking from the vessels of the temple. Okay. And then, God sent the handwriting on the wall, which I think is a picture of Trump, because the handwriting is opposite the lampstand. And if the lampstand's on the left, then the handwriting's on the right. Okay. And the writing said, this is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. And then Paris, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. That same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the king received the kingdom at about the age of 62. So I think Trump is the rider on the horse with the scales, because the scales connects to buying and selling. And so like the Trump followers weighed Biden and Harris on the scales and found them deficient. Definitely think that is true. And then God says your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. So that would connect to like civil war in America. Um, so um, okay. Um, and so let's do a little fun stuff. Okay, so in Back to the Future, so these are pictures from Back to the Future. We see the Twin Pines Mall at 1:16 a.m. And the Lone Pine Mall at 1:33 a.m. Okay, so Marty returns to the mall at 1:33 a.m. The mall is now called the Lone Pine Mall because, okay, so this was fascinating. Marty ran over one of the pines on 11/5/1955. Okay, so we see that 11/5 connects to Election Day. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. Marty returns to the mall right when Doc is being shot by the Libyans. So right now, during this election, we're seeing Iran threatening Israel. Okay. Um, so um, that's interesting. Okay. So what we saw, okay, so when Marty first goes to the mall, we see 1:15 changes to 1:16. Okay. So that could be a picture of November 5th switching to November 6th. Okay. So election day. Like, so it's been really interesting because Back to the Future has a lot of the key dates, okay, that connect to prophecy. So I do think God hid a bunch of prophecy in this movie. Okay. Um, but then 1:16 is also 9/11 upside down. So there's this whole concept too with 9/11 being upside down. I think that's a picture of it's either 9/11 or it's 11/9. Um, you know, um, so God kind of, you know, with that would uses either the numbers 11/9 or 9/11. Um, um, And then we saw too that Doc's watch changed from 1:18 to 1:19 when he's about to send Einstein on his trip. So that's November 8th and November 9th. Okay, so I think maybe what God's saying is that November 5th and 6th are important dates and November 8th and 9th are important dates. Okay, so let's see what happens. And then what's interesting too is that there's two events in the movies by the in the square by the clock tower where Marty's being chased by either Biff and his friends or Griff and his friends. Okay. And in the second event, the windows are broken. Okay. So I think those are two January 6th type events. Okay. Because they happen in the town square. Okay. Um, and so with the second event, and see what's interesting is that the I think the first event or in the first movie when it happens, I think it happens in, let me think. It happens the week of, he's there in the first week of November. Um so the first time it happens, it's in November. I mean, in the future, the second time it happens, it's October 21st in the future. Okay, but I think it's like, so that whole concept of looking at things upside down and stuff, it's like, I think we need to look at the first movie to get the date, but the second event to see that it's when the windows are being broken. Okay, which is Crystal Knock. Okay. So October 21st is when they went into the future. We see three people watching the Twin Towers on a TV screen. One of them is upside down, floating. Okay. So sometimes to see the truth, you have to see it upside down. Okay, I didn't come up with that. Someone made a video that said that. Okay, and I thought that was really true. The TV screen is broken. Okay, so we need to see 9/11 upside down. So 11/9 instead of 9/11. So they go into the future in 2015, which adds up to 8. Okay, so that could connect to day 8 or the 8th king. Okay, October 21st is Netanyahu's birthday. He's now 75. Um, so, okay, so that's that slide. Okay. Um, so what about November 9th? Okay, so it's Chesvan 8, 8 8 on the Hebrew calendar. It would be 888 if you take the Gregorian year. Okay, the Hebrew year. So for the longest time, the Hebrew year did add up to 24, but then with the new year, it now adds up to 25. um, so November 9th is the 86th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken windows. Okay, so I think that's interesting because I think the windows connects to Trump. Um, Jesus is the door. Okay, what's interesting, it's the 86th anniversary, so that concept, the 8 6 connect to like the sixth king that becomes the eighth king. Okay, so Kristallnacht was the start of persecution of the Jews in Germany and kind of like the start of World War II. Um, so what if, so God talks about like turning our days of mourning, into joy or whatever. So, what if we're going to see God do a turnaround on 11/9 instead of it being a sad anniversary? What if God turns it into a happy anniversary for his people? Okay. November 9th is also the 8th year anniversary of Hillary Clinton conceding and Trump winning. The elections that year were on November 8th, 2016. Um, see that number 8 there, and you see that number 6 there too. Um, but you also 2016 also adds up to 9. So, um, so like November 8th and 9th. That could be a sign, that could be a clue. 11/9 would be like the 9th of Av on the Gregorian calendar. So the 9th of Av is on the Hebrew calendar. It's the date when both the holy temples were set aflame. It's the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, and it is the date that many other tragedies, at least 5 national tragedies, befell the Jewish people. Like they got kicked out of various countries on the 9th of Av. Um, both holy temples were set aflame. The Jewish people are always, they pray for like 3 weeks before the 9th of Av because they're worried about things happening on that date. Okay, well, what was interesting this year is that um, it was a leap year. So the 9th of Av, instead of it being the 9th of the 11th month, it was the 9th of the 12th month. Okay, and actually, what we saw was the Jewish people just really phoned it in, I guess you could say. I mean, they really repented and fasted. Especially because they were, for the 9th of Av, um, they were worried back then too about Iran attacking them. Okay, they were under threat from Iran. But they definitely phoned it in and fasted and prayed, and we actually kind of saw, like, I think um, there was 2 events where God's people just really prayed, um, and so I think we started to see. So the 9th of Av was one of them. What was the other event? Um, Now I don't remember the other event where they really prayed and fast. But I think, we definitely, I think we started to see God turning things around because then they started to have victory. They started killing some of the key leaders of their enemies, so I really think God heard their prayers um, and started to turn things around for them. Okay, because they really phoned it in, they turned it around and um really fasted and prayed. And so I do think August 13th was the one date, and I can't off the top of my head remember the second date, sorry about that. But there were definitely 2 dates where they really did that. Oh, maybe it was Yom Kippur this year. I bet that's what it is. So August 13th was the 9th of Av, and then Yom Kippur was October um, um, October 12th. Okay. Because we had saw in previous years where they were kind of fighting in Israel on Yom Kippur, and people were just so much more humbled this year and got along. Um, um, so that was cool. So, I definitely think that God has heard the prayers of Israel um, on um, the 9th of Av and then Yom Kippur this year. Okay. Um, and then November 9th is also 15 months after the Saudi deal. Okay. So August 9th was, when they reported in the paper about Biden's Saudi deal. Okay. And then, so that would take us 15 months, would take us to November 9th. So did I not put the verse in here? So we get that time frame. So I mean, I bet it's on another slide, but I'll just read it because I don't want to forget it. So in when we read about the flood, we read, okay, one more page. Okay, so it says the water prevailed more and more upon the earth. So when you read about the flood, you want to think about Biden because he's the beast from the sea. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. Um, and then it says, all flesh that moved on the earth perished. So we see that, 15 number there. And then the 24th day after Sukkot, day one, that, this is the 24 number that I'm looking for on November 9th. It was 40 days since October 1st. Okay, so October 1st was when Iran attacked Israel. So we read in Genesis 8, also in the flood, we read the water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the top of the mountains became visible. So I don't know if this means like maybe Iran got less afraid of Biden, so that's why they were willing to attack Israel on October 1st. Okay, but then it says, then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark he had made, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. So 40 days after Iran. Okay, so like the top of the mountains could be a picture of Iran, kind of like peeking out. Okay. Um, but then 40 days later is November 9th. And so Noah's opened the window of the ark. So remember, the window connects to Trump. And he sent out the raven. So the raven could be a picture of Trump too, or his followers. And it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. So water drying up is a picture of Biden and his followers going away. So in Daniel, it says, okay, but then to understand going here and there, in Daniel 12, we read, but as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. So when I read these verses, I was realizing that concealing the words and sealing up the book until the end of time is a picture of God's people concealed in Messiah's Sukkah. And then, so we're going to be concealed in the Sukkah while there's these people outside going back and forth. Okay. Like fighting a civil war, basically. And then, so, I did this in my last video, Biden's 9/11 connections. There's a lot of connections to Biden with 9/11. And we saw on the DNC this year, on 8/19, was that the first day? Yes, the first day was 3 years, 11 months, 9 days. So see that 11/9 number? Okay. From 9/11/20, which was Trump's Bahrain deal, And then it was also 119 days after the first day of Passover this year. Okay. So, definitely interesting. So I just a lot of 11/9 signs, okay? Um even though I was making 9/11 connections, they're actually really 11/9 signs, okay? And then I wrote meaning of 9/11, but also meaning of 11/9, because look, Psalm 119 is Psalm 11:9, okay? Like, you think God might be trying to emphasize that? And then he says, you have removed all the wicked of the earth like dross. Therefore, I love your testimonies. So I think the meaning of 11/9 or 9/11 is God getting rid of his enemies. Okay. And then October 24th, 8th day of Sukkot, is the 119th week. We already talked about that. And then, so, if Trump wins, he's going to be the 47th president. Okay. So see how there's 9/11 connected to Trump. He was the 45th president, which was 9. 47 would be 11. Okay. But it would make him the eighth king, which the eighth king does destruction. Okay, he is of the seven and he goes to destruction. Then also with the RNC, we see that same 11/9 number. The first day of the RNC in 2024 was 11 months, 9 days on the Hebrew calendar. Okay. Is God screaming 11/9 to us? I think so. And then also July 18th, which was the fourth day of the RNC, when Trump spoke, was 1290 days after January 6th. Okay, so we read in Daniel 12, it says, from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1290 days. Okay. So we saw that they weren't able to count the electoral count because of January 6th. So something got abolished on January 6th, and then 1290 days later was the first day of the RNC. So definitely, where Trump was really put in as the Republican candidate. So the abomination, the AOD was set up on on July 18th. I have this other 1290 day connected to Trump. Because there's also the RNC in 2016. There was also a 1290 day. Okay. Now wait a minute. Okay, I'm not saying this right. His deal of the century was 1290 days after the RNC in 2016. Okay. We definitely know that the DOC was the abomination of desolation because it caused COVID to come on week 7. Oh, and then on week 17 was the BLM rioters. Okay. But then with Biden, there's a 1290 connected to Biden because his Saudi deal was 1290 days after the DOC. Okay. And the desolation that came after the Saudi deal was this war in Israel. That came on week 8. Okay. So, but then it makes me wonder about the 1335 number. It could be a number for Sukkot, okay? Because then it kind of adds up to 8. Because then Daniel 12 says, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1335 days. Because what I'm wondering is, if people started following Trump and Biden as like messianic figures, we definitely saw people go crazy with we saw people go crazy with Trump's DOC, and then we saw people go crazy with Biden's Saudi deal. Okay, like saying, oh, now we got peace in the Middle East. And so I wonder if the 1335 is a picture of, okay, you didn't fall for following Trump or Biden as false messianic figures. You waited and attained to the 1335 days, which is Jesus's Sukkot. Okay. So, anyways, then we read about the gallows being 50 cubits high. so I just wanted to bring in these verses because it says, the king arose in his anger. So this is from Esther 7. The king arose in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. Now, now when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on him. So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. So first it says the king arose in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden. So there's a connection to Revelation 12 where we see the dragon enraged with the woman. So he goes and he makes war with Israel. Okay. So I'm wondering if Biden's anger is because they made him drop out of the campaign. So then he decided to go to Israel and put more pressure on them, trying to get a peace deal to make a name for himself. Okay. But then we have Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther. So that could be a picture of Trump campaigning at this time while Biden was focused on Israel. Okay. And then it says, when the king returned from the palace garden, Haman was falling on the couch. Okay. So is that a picture of Trump winning the election, maybe? But then the king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? So then here I think Haman maybe switches to be Biden. So then it says, as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So it says, you shall cover your face so that you cannot see the land, for I had set you as a sign to the house of Israel. So I mean, that would be a picture of people that can't go into the land. Okay, getting their face covered. But then they decide to hang Haman on the gallows that Haman made for Mordecai. Okay, so the gallows was made 50 cubits high. Okay, well, the war in Israel started 50 years after the Yom Kippur War. Okay, and there's kind of a connection to Biden's Saudi deal because, I mean, they were mad about the Saudi deal. They were worried about the Saudi deal, and so that's why they started this war. Okay. And then so since Biden got the war started in Israel, and see, it started on 10/7, and so God does connect it to Biden. Okay. So God will divide America in civil war. Okay. And then God's anger will subside. Okay. Then so then I just have this verse. Jeremiah 9:11 says, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant. I mean, I think God's already done this with the cities of Judah, a desolation, because in southern Israel and in northern Israel, they can't live there because of the problems with Hezbollah and the problems of Hamas. So that's already kind of true. I don't know if there would be more. I'm not really sure. But then God says, I will make Jerusalem. I think Jerusalem sometimes is a shadow of America. He said, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins. So we have seen some of that fulfilled where, with the hurricane and the fires. But there might be more with the Civil War. But remember, Jesus is going to rebuild it and we'll be protected. And I think probably our houses too protected. I mean, because that picture of Sodom, they can't find the door of our houses. And then July 14th was 2 years after Biden signed the paper with Lapid, 62 days after May 14th. Okay. So Pharaoh has dreams after 2 full years. Um, and then if you take that July 14th date, we have 119 days until 11/9. Okay. Um, so it was 119 days after the deal of the century when the George Floyd riots started. So maybe 2 years and 119 days after Biden signed the paper is when we're going to see, Trump's followers start rioting or whatever. And then, okay, so the 2 full years. So what's very interesting in Genesis 41, um, I think this is Joseph saying this to Pharaoh. He says, "Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God and God will quickly bring it about. Now, let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and send him over the land of Egypt." Okay, so um, I think the fact that we're seeing this election being fulfilled twice, it means that the matter was determined by God and God will quickly bring it about. I think we're going to start seeing quickly the last days being fulfilled. Okay, and then God says, Pharaoh should look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. That would be Messiah. Okay, I mean, so Joseph was discerning and wise and could interpret dreams just like the Messiah. So, um, just a few more notes. Gog and Magog. Gog comes down from the north. Okay, we've already seen a fulfillment with Russia. Is the northern country doing a type of civil war with Ukraine? We're gonna, maybe see a civil war in America, north versus south. Iran's also in the north. I don't know if we're gonna see something with them. I mean, they're threatening, so I'm not sure. Um, okay, but remember the promises. Those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Moshiach. And so, if Jerusalem is a shadow in prophecy of America, we will see America rebuilt when Jesus comes back. And then the firstborn of the despised wife gets a double share of the inheritance. Okay, so Sarah was despised by Hagar. Elijah got a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Okay, so we're going to get a double share. Okay, we're like the despised. Okay. Um, um, and then this is the statue. Um, and so basically, I just wanted to emphasize it's a divided kingdom. Okay, iron does not mix with wet clay. Okay, so I think iron is Trump's peeps. So iron like connects to war, you know. I mean, so it talks about legs of iron. I think the legs of iron could be Trump and Netanyahu, because I definitely think iron connects to Netanyahu too. But here I have Trump and BLM because we saw that in America where we saw the I think BLM is connects to the military branch of the Biden Obama followers. But now we're down to the feet. And then so iron is Trump's peeps. 10 toes would connect to the 10 horns. The wetness connects to Biden's peeps because he's the beast from the sea. The clay would connect to Messiah's peeps. So we're all kind of mixed in there, but we don't adhere to one another. Okay. And then what's interesting in Hanukkah, we play with the dreidel that is dried clay. So when it's dry and ready, so that's a picture of there's no longer any sea. God's clay, his people are finally made ready by Hanukkah. And then Daniel 9. Okay, so this is the one. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. On the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. So I think Trump will bring desolation, even till a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So Trump will war with Messiah, and the Messiah will win. What's interesting, okay, so this is the Trump Tower in 2018. So we the number 11 is emphasized. April 7th is 7 plus 4. 2018 is adds up to 11. And then it was 6 firefighters were injured. It happened on Nissan 22, so those numbers 6 and 8 are in there. The blaze broke out on the 50th floor, which would connect to maybe the war in Israel. And it's definitely a 9/11 picture. And then this idea of out of time. So, I mean, if we see burning on the left and burning on the right, we could be safe in the middle with Messiah. But also, I thought of it connects to Israel too, that if we're seeing, because they got war in the north and war in the south, okay? And so maybe that means we're at the end of time, okay? In the last days, okay? Basically, so I'll just say the great city splits into 3 parts, okay? So I think that's America. We have the Jesus followers in the middle, and then who are waiting to stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. And then the followers on the right and on the left. Okay. So just a lot of information. So when you want to break the clock, hopefully you're encouraged to see that maybe we're fulfilling prophecy, and there's a reason why it seems like we're repeating history. Okay. So don't break that clock. Just hang in there. I think Messiah is near, right at the door. Okay. So hang in there, and then he's going to make up for the years that the locusts have eaten. So thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate you listening. Take care. God bless.